Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and we have finally reached day number 1 of San Francisco 49ers training camp and the biggest news of the day. Again, day number 1 of 49ers football is that Brandon Aiyuk showed up to training camp and what is now going to be called a hold in. Going to talk about Brandon Aiyuk. Going to talk about what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch had to say during their press conferences today. Also going to talk a little bit about what Kyle Shanahan had to say on the TK show with Tim Kawakami via The Athletic, because he admitted they tried to coerce Bill Belichick to come to San Francisco. Gave us some tidbits onto what happened last year with the whole Tom Brady fiasco and him maybe being a San Francisco 49er, and many other things that happened on day number 1 of 49ers training camp. If you haven't already, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and let's dive into day number 1 of Niners camp because, look, let's celebrate, folks. Niners football is back. It's a long road ahead back to Super Bowl 59, but it all starts on day 1 of training camp. And again, on day 1 of NFL training camp of Niners camp, wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk, amid contract negotiations, amid what has been characterized as tumultuous to some, albeit laughable to myself, Brandon Aiyuk showed up to training camp. And again, we are calling this the hold in. And this kind of goes two ways, right? The Niners get what they want out of Brandon Aiyuk. He's in the building, likely in meetings, probably won't practice. It wouldn't be smart of Aiyuk to practice without getting a brand new contract. Why would you practice if you're not going to go out there and get the contract you want and risk injury? That makes sense. But for Aiyuk, not only does he get to avoid the $40,000 fines that would happen each day he's not there, he also kind of screws himself once again. It feels like every time we're talking about Brandon Aiyuk, we're not able to take him seriously. We discussed ad nauseum how he missed the boat on trying to act like a diva to get the contract he wants. And when, of all days, he could have not shown up, could have told San Francisco, this thing is more serious than you believe it to be. I may not play. I'm not going to practice. I'm not going to be here unless you give me a contract. He shows up. Like, we already know you had no leverage, but even if somebody wanted to give him a little tiny mouse full of cheese, I mean, my God, Brandon Aiyuk, you can criticize San Francisco and they're reportedly not wanting to negotiate since May. That's fine. But of all the days to maybe draw up some drama, the expectation was he's not going to attend. He's going to hold out, and he'll eventually be there by week 1. That's the assumption. While you want to get paid, do not come. Do not come. Brandon Aiyuk said, I'm going to come to practice and screw himself again. You are openly telling San Francisco, I want this contract and I want to do this, that, and the other. You better pay me or I'm going to go play for Washington with Jaden Daniels. I might go to Pittsburgh. I may ask for a trade. But your actions are the exact opposite. I am someone, whether it's in friendships or marriage, with your parents, whatever it is, your job, actions have always spoken louder than words to me. You can speak all you want. You can feed me all the lies you want. I want to see the actions put into practice. You practice what you preach, right? And for Brandon Aiyuk, nothing he is preaching is equaling his practicing. If you want to ask for a trade, ask for a trade. That's fine. It's all part of the game. But then you show up to camp, again, telling the entire world, including the team you're trying to negotiate with, that I want to be here, that it's not that serious. Things aren't that bad yet. So that's how the day started, was Brandon Aiyuk shows up to training camp. And they asked John Lynch about it, and he said, we expect all of our players to report. They asked him further about Brandon Aiyuk and what has seemed to be a disconnect in contract negotiations. And to sum up what he said, John Lynch responded to a question in regards to negotiations with Aiyuk and said, "We've had great communication. We started this thing really early and made it a priority to try to get it done. We haven't been able to, and that's a shame. Brandon's a big part of our team, and we expect he'll be here this season." And I want you to keep that quote in mind because, well, yes, the expectation from myself, I'm assuming from yourself, from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and Jed York and the entire team is Brandon Aiyuk is going to be here with the San Francisco 49ers, at least in 2024, if not beyond, right? But I forgot who it was. One member of the media asked John Lynch, "Last year you were so confident to a point that you openly said we are not trading Nick Bosa." One of the very few times, if not the only time, John Lynch in San Francisco has openly said we are not open to trading said player. Well, they asked John Lynch today, do you have that same sentiment towards Brandon Aiyuk? And John Lynch openly declined to say they would not trade Brandon Aiyuk like he did last year with Nick Bosa, but was adamant Aiyuk is expected to be part of the Niners this season. And I think that's where things stand, right there. They want Aiyuk to be there. Aiyuk wants to be there. They don't want to trade him. But unlike Nick Bosa, and just like Deebo Samuel, and just like George Kittle, and just like Fred Warner, and almost every other player they negotiated a brand new contract with, if someone comes in and swoops in with the first round pick and this, that, and the other for Brandon Aiyuk, they are not going to be afraid to trade him. And I think while that's not where things will end up, I did think it was pretty interesting because you can see, again, by the way they talk and the way both parties interact with the media and on social media, that you can tell who has leverage. If you asked Brandon Aiyuk, which he was asked, where will you play in 2024? Probably San Francisco. If not, the Commanders. If not, the Steelers. But likely San Francisco. Hey, John Lynch, would you trade Brandon Aiyuk? Well, we like Brandon a lot. We think he'll be here. We're adamant he'll be here in San Francisco this season, but we're going to openly decline to say we will not trade him. That is to say to the rest of the world, hey, we don't want to trade this guy, but if you want to give us a first round pick, if the Jets want to give us Hassan Reddick, who we can re-sign to a brand new deal and maybe a second round pick, we're not going to say no. We're not going to just hang up the phone. Now, we do know what they have said no to, because Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, indeed said that the Niners turned down a second round pick, which I believe was pick 34 in this past year's draft, for Brandon Aiyuk. They have openly showed and told the NFL world what his worth is to them. It's a first round pick, if not more. And I wouldn't be shocked if they believe Aiyuk is worth an A.J. Brown-like trade when Philadelphia acquired him from Tennessee for a first round pick and more. But again, you can see who's talking with leverage, how they're acting, who's negotiating with confidence, and none of that is Brandon Aiyuk, to a point of, Brandon, if you want to get traded, why did you show up today? This was a day to prove something to San Francisco, to prove to the fans, to the other teams that might be wanting to trade for you, that, hey, this guy's serious. He may be out of San Francisco. He wants to get paid. Mike Silver has openly said via the SF Chronicle, other teams are willing to meet Brandon Aiyuk's asking price. If the world knows that, I know that, you now know that, the Niners obviously know that. This was a time to, while not gain some leverage back, it was an opportunity to at least make them think a little bit. of do we actually want to pay you? Are you actually worth the hassle to make them for the first time throughout the entire negotiations maybe think twice? And like he did in April, by not asking for a trade then, he misses opportunity to actually make San Francisco wonder, should we pay Brandon Aiyuk? Instead, they're like, yeah, we can keep him, we can trade him. We hold every single card. We hold the ace, we hold the king, we hold the queen, we hold the whatever else is in there, the 10, the 9, the 8, the 7, the 6, the 5, the 4, the 3, the 2, and the 1, and the Joker. Like, San Francisco holds every single card in the deck. And Ayuk's like, I'm here. You're openly hurting your chances of getting the contract you want. I don't know who's advising Ayuk to do this, whether it's his agent, whether it's his own doing, but brother, I love you. It's not working. You're actively hurting yourself. Actively hurting yourself. That said, I still think a deal gets done. It's the first day camp. Practice, I think, is open to the media tomorrow, which leads us to people who will not practice when the team opens up practice to the media starting, if you're watching this on Wednesday afternoon, because rookie Ricky Pearsall, who injured his hamstring away from the team facility, will start training camp, I should say, on the NFI list, which essentially means I got hurt away from Levi Stadium, but he's only expected to be out for the first block of training camp, which means Ricky Pearsall's injury is not serious. He essentially stubbed his toe, like we said, and it's not going to be a concern. He's supposed to be back by next week, according to Kyle Shanahan, so no worries there in regards to will the Ricky Pearsall injury affect the Brandon Aiyuk negotiations? It's not serious. Can hamstrings linger? Of course they can. They'll be cautious with him, but the expectation is he only misses 1 week of practice and returns to the field by next week, aka the second block. Hurts none of his progression, doesn't affect the Aiyuk stuff. The Pearsall injury currently is a non-story. Talanoa Hufanga, who suffered a torn ACL against the Buccaneers last year, Drake Jackson, who hurt his knee last season, and Dre Greenlaw, who tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl, will all start training camp on the PUP list, essentially meaning that when these guys come back, you can activate them whenever you want to. The expectation is Hufanga is back by week 1. Drake Jackson reportedly was supposed to be back by training camp. He has yet to be cleared. And Dre Greenlaw will likely be back towards the later half of the NFL season. But I do want to focus on Talanoa Hufanga's injury because I had a question by Lori Matthews. We all love Lori, always in the comments section here. She asked, when do I think Hufanga is going to be back? ACLs are always tricky. I firmly believe he's not going to be back until week 4. You give them 1 month of the NFL season. That leads into my bold predictions going into training camp that came out 2 days ago or came out yesterday on YouTube. And you can hear me say in that video, I expect San Francisco to sign a veteran safety. Trusting the safety group that has an unproven Jair Brown, an unproven Malik Mustafa, a recovering Talanoa Hufanga, and then Taylor Hawkins and George Odom, who are special team or young safeties that are unproven as well. That group is not going to fly unless Brown continues his success from last year, which I expect, but the bigger question is Hufanga's recovery and Malik Mustafa's progression in his first ever NFL training camp. How is he going to transition to the NFL? My expectation is, like most NFL defenders and safeties in mid-round picks, despite the potential being there, and the expectation is for myself, Malik Mustafa will become this team's starting safety by the end of the year opposite Jair Brown. And the hope is that he is starting next to Jair Brown so they do not have to pay Talaonoa Hufanga a big contract once his deal is done after this season. That said, you got a long way to go to get to that point, hence why I think they're going to take it really slow with Hufanga. You never want to rush him back. When he's healthy, he's proven to be an all-pro level player. You have no reason to rush him back. You sign a veteran safety. You kind of piece things together early on in the year because late in the season, you have an incredibly tough stretch. You have to go to Buffalo, amongst other places where you do not want to play. If you go to Green Bay late in the year, you need Hufanga healthy. You need an entirely healthy defense, especially a secondary against those two teams late in the year. I think Hufanga isn't activated until week 4. If he's activated, I don't think he's starting at full capacity until week 4, if not week 6. Moving on to Drake Jackson, though, there's a lot of talk, and I almost put this in my bold predictions that Drake Jackson could find himself on the outs in San Francisco, and I still believe he has potential. If you don't know about Drake Jackson, the way he was utilized at USC, multiple different scheme changes, he was standing up, he was having his hand in the dirt, he was an edge rusher, he was an outside linebacker, he was in coverage, he was a pass rusher. He didn't really have a defined role. So when he came out in his rookie season, the expectation was he's going to have to get his body right. And by simply what was shown on film, that was the case. There were some flashes of greatness, but his body wasn't right yet. He wore down toward the end of the year. And you go back to last season, the expectations are high. I think Trent Williams said he's built like an all-pro or a Pro Bowler. First week against Pittsburgh, 3 sacks. Great. San Francisco has found the next coming of, Charles Haley, right? Everyone's hyped up, this, that, and the other. Then sharp decline, non-existent. San Francisco goes and trades for Randy Gregory and eventually Chase Young. And then Drake Jackson goes on IR with a knee injury. He's going into year number 3 on a defense that is not very deep at edge rusher, but does have a lot of talent to where he could find himself buried. And you obviously have Nick Bosa, Leonard Floyd. They just signed Yetur Gross-Matos to a relatively bigger deal, right? Austin Bryant's still there. Arbor Beal Jr. is still there. There are some pieces that Drake Jackson could find himself being the 5th, 6th edge rusher on this defensive line if things don't go his way or if he's not healthy. While I believe in Drake Jackson still, I think you have to be, unfortunately, it is realistic here. He hasn't shown much. What he's shown hasn't lasted long, and he can't stay healthy through 2 seasons. Can that change? Of course it can. But right now, I would not be shocked to hear Drake Jackson or see Drake Jackson's name towards the bottom of the edge rushing depth chart when training camp commences and when it's over with, heading into preseason game number 1. That brings us to Dre Greenlaw in his Achilles. We talked about in the bold predictions that Tatum Bethune, to me, is a dark horse 4th linebacker on this team. But Fred Warner recently said on 95.7 The Game that Dre Greenlaw is doing well. A lot of DRs, Dre's on the team now, Devondre's, right? But Dre Greenlaw is doing well. But we've yet to see him on the field, yet to see him practice. I would assume, this is not any report by all means, I would assume if he's doing any exercise, it's very light, a lot of stretches, no weights. If it is weights, it's just body weights. And for Dre Greenlaw, San Francisco is likely going to take this recovery very, very slow, but good to know where he currently stands. Again, Hufanga, Drake Jackson, and Dre Greenlaw all going to start training camp on the PUP list. Dre Greenlaw likely going to be an IR candidate to begin the year, but we will see how things progress into preseason and the rest of training camp. And Ricky Pearsall is going to start on the NFI list. It is expected to be back by next week. Moving on here, more injury news. George Kittle and Mooney Ward are both completely healed from their offseason surgeries. Both had adductor injuries, and both are expected to practice in the first couple of days of training camp. But John Lynch was clear and said they will take things slow with both their recoveries. Again, both all pros. One of those guys wants to get paid after this season, being Mooney Ward. I would expect San Francisco, there's literally no reason to rush either one of those guys back. I would expect if they don't practice week 1, you get Pearsall, Kittle, and Mooney Ward back by week number 2. Give them some rest. Let them heal up, be 100%, which they should already be, but you can be 100%. George Kittle said he lost like 23 pounds in the offseason. Crazy, or maybe been 30 pounds, whatever the report was, because he couldn't work out. He was eating, but he couldn't work out. He's now back up to around 240 or whatever he is. But that's what we're talking about here. You have an injury, you have surgery. You don't get to work out every single day for 2 or 3 hours. You don't get to go to weight training and do cardio and do stretches and do all the things it takes to play in the NFL. You are surgery, physical therapy, resting, elevation, icing, same thing the next day. You're doing things to maintain and strengthen those muscles up again, those tendons, those ligaments again. You're not working out for an 18-week NFL season. So I wouldn't expect those guys to be doing much in the first week or so. Although I will say George Kittle was out there during OTAs, messing around, catching some balls. So good news, nothing to worry about in regards to either one of those players. And that should be all the news for injuries. I do want to discuss the quarterback 2 job, because being at OTAs, at rookie camp, Joshua Dobbs, the pastronaut, if you will, and Brandon Allen were the clear-cut quarterback 2s. They were the ones leading the charge when Brock Purdy wasn't there, and Brock Purdy wasn't there that often. But those 2 guys are expected to be fighting for the quarterback 2 and 3 job, with Tanner Mordecai as this team's dark horse quarterback 4, maybe being able to replace one of those 2 players. But both those guys have little guaranteed money, but it's still guaranteed, which could mean nothing. This team cut Nate Sudfeld to keep Brock Purdy a handful of years ago, and we saw how those things worked out. But I think San Francisco right now wants 2 veteran quarterbacks behind Brock Purdy in case he goes down. I'm under the assumption that Kyle Shanahan likes Brandon Allen more, but in a pinch, saw the way Joshua Dobbs came in and won games for Minnesota last year and said, hey, we could need something late in the season. I think I would trust Brandon Allen to come in the middle of the game more than Joshua Dobbs. But if I needed a quarterback for 2 to 3 weeks, I think I would trust Joshua Dobbs to start over Brandon Allen. I think while their play styles are similar, Joshua Dobbs gives you a little more in regards to playmaking, whereas Brandon Allen is that basic, point guard type of quarterback, which is fine. He's a game manager. But I think that's kind of where Kyle Shanahan's mind is at. Obviously, I'm assuming things, but when you watch 2 of those guys play, at least on tape in the NFL, there is a clear-cut quarterback number 2, but Brandon Allen kind of gives you a higher floor, but a way smaller ceiling, or way lower ceiling than Joshua Dobbs does, where Joshua Dobbs can win you 3 games if Purdy misses time, depending on the opponent. Brandon Allen could keep you in a game if Purdy gets hurt middle of the game, whereas Joshua Dobbs could cost you a game if you put him in against, let's say, a team like Dallas or Philadelphia or Kansas City, right? So if I was to predict, I think Joshua Dobbs wins the quarterback 2 job, but it's going to be interesting to see how things progress, because neither one of those guys stood out much in OTAs or minicamp. Now it's minicamp and OTAs, who cares? But they didn't look very good. Like, it was almost making me say, can we go get Sam Darnold back? Like, at least Sam Darnold looked competent. These guys look fine, but I wouldn't say competent. It was like Joshua Dobbs is learning a new offense. Brandon Allen's just not a great quarterback. What do you expect? This may be their weakest quarterback room in 3 years, and the expectation is Purdy is not going to miss games, but he got 2 stingers last year. There was a concern he wasn't going to play against the Bengals. Obviously, he did, and they lost that game, but that wasn't Brock Purdy's fault. That said, this is their worst quarterback room in 3 years. Worse than last year by far. You could argue last year may have been their strongest. They had 4 quarterbacks that could play in a pinch. Darnold obviously going to start for the Vikings this year. At least that's the expectation in Minnesota. Then you have Trey Lance now in Dallas, which who knows? Honestly, who knows with Trey Lance? But I think this is kind of the year where if your quarterback goes down, you were likely screwed. Whereas the past 2 years, it was, Trey goes down, you have Jimmy. Jimmy goes down, you have Brock. Brock goes down, you have Sam Darnold. Then you have Brandon Allen. And now it's like, you have Joshua Dobbs, who I already said could win you a couple games against bad opponents, right? And Brandon Allen can keep you in a game or two, but it's not very good. So quarterback 2 job is going to be one to keep an eye on. Want to move forward to arguably the biggest news of the day. And that is Kyle Shanahan shaved his mustache. He openly said, I had a mustache. I grew it out during the offseason. It was weird at first. I didn't like it. Then all of a sudden, I loved it and got accustomed to it, but thought, hey, if I come back to training camp with a mustache, that's the only questions you're going to ask. And honestly, it was the only thing I wanted to know about was, Kyle, where's your mustache? If you haven't seen it, there are pictures of Christian McCaffrey's wedding, and Shanahan's rocking just no beard, sunglasses, slicked back hair, and a mustache. And you're like, oh my goodness. Kyle Shanahan, my wife saw him and said, wow, I will never see Kyle Shanahan the same. He's kind of hot now. And I was like, okay, Top Gun Maverick, Jesus, like what's going on here? We got married less than 3 months ago. But I digress. Shanahan no longer has the mustache, and we move forward. We have some news that wasn't happening in the press conference. In fact, it was happening via podcast, which if you haven't yet, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, and thank you so much. If you want to watch your Niners play this year, use our promo code 49ers Access 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com and save yourself $20 off your first purchase. But Kyle Shanahan was on the TK show with Tim Kawakami. Love Tim. If you're on Twitter, very brash, unafraid to block people. He has no time for your fun and games. He means business whenever you meet him. But love Tim, does great work for The Athletic. He had Kyle Shanahan on his podcast like he does every day one of training camp, and he asked him a handful of questions. One of them was just a clear-cut, like, wow, insight into what Kyle Shanahan believes. The other 2 are more of bigger picture, who'd you almost hire, who'd you almost sign, and things began with last off season. Brock Purdy's injury. Torn UCL. How is he going to recover? Was he going to be healthy? And if you know the rumors, the Niners almost brought in Tom Brady. Now, they asked Tom Brady. He said no, but Shanahan opened up about the conversation he had with Brock Purdy about Tom Brady. And to sum things up, he essentially said, I told Brock, in the 7 games you played, you've shown us you're not going to be competing with Trey Lance. It is your job. You are the quarterback of this team. You are the quarterback of this franchise. You're the future of this franchise. The only way it won't be that is if Tom Brady decides to play 1 year here. But the way Kyle Shanahan worded it and believed what he was saying was that when you tell a young quarterback you've only played 7 games and you also tore your UCL, which you could miss a handful of weeks during the year last season, that the only way you're not going to be the starter, it's not going to be the guy we traded 3 first-round draft picks for. It's only going to be if Tom Brady comes and plays. Kyle Shanahan openly said that that was him essentially giving the keys to the franchise to Brock Purdy and saying, hey, like, don't go home upset. Don't go home sad. I'm being honest with you that this is the biggest compliment you can give to a young quarterback. That if anyone's going to replace you, it's not Trey Lance, who we literally may have given up a chance at a Super Bowl for. Imagine you had those 3 first-round draft picks back. Who could you have? Where what could have happened, right? Maybe you don't have a right guard issue. Maybe you don't have a right tackle issue. Maybe you have a better linebacker or who knows, cornerbacks, whatever it is, right? But he essentially told Brock Purdy that despite you only playing less than 2 months of football, the only person that's ever going to replace you is the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Imagine your coach telling you that, your boss telling you that although you've proven a lot, you're still relatively unproven. 7 games, not even 2 months worth of football, and you're recovering from what could have been a catastrophic injury. That you're the starter, no matter. Trey Lance, he can't do nothing to win this job. Sam Darnold, he can't do nothing to win this job. Brandon Allen, who? The only way you're not going to be a starter is if Tom Brady decides to come out of retirement at 41 years old and play 1 year here. We're talking about, comparing stories of Brock Purdy, last pick in the draft, Mr. Irrelevant, to Tom Brady, right? What, pick 199, was never supposed to be there. Drew Bledsoe gets hurt. Here comes Tom Brady. 20 plus years later, 7-time Super Bowl champion, I believe. The greatest quarterback of all time, the greatest dynasty in NFL history with the Patriots. And you tell the kid that really has never won anything, right? After seven games, 7 weeks, middle of the year, Mr. Irrelevant, almost wasn't drafted, almost wasn't even on the Niners unless he got drafted by them. That the only player that's going to replace you, and just for 1 year, is the greatest quarterback of all time. I mean, my goodness. That doesn't tell you Brock Purdy is going to get the freaking bag in 1 year's time. Like, Shanahan is like, I got my guy. I don't need anybody else. Of course you want Mahomes, but you got the guy in the building. Like, we've talked for the last couple years of Shanahan and Purdy having the synergy and chemistry, and there is love not just on the field, also off the field. Shanahan never gushed about Jimmy or Trey this way. And to be fair, they haven't played as good as Brock Purdy ever has, but that is to say, in a span of 7 weeks, Shanahan said, look, we are not replacing you unless it's Tom Brady of all people. Like, talk about the confidence and what will eventually become one of the highest quarterback contracts ever. Moving on to, I guess, other former Patriot news. There was a lot of talk during the offseason of, when San Francisco fired Steve Wilkes. It was a handful of days after losing against Kansas City in the Super Bowl. What were they going to do? We talked about potential candidates to be this team's next defensive coordinator. Could it be Brandon Staley? Could it be Mike Vrabel, who was fired from the Tennessee Titans? Could it be Pete Carroll, who was essentially fired by Seattle, right? Could it be an in-house hiring? Who could it be? Could it be Jeff Ulbrich from the Jets? Then there was the biggest name of the bunch. That was Bill Belichick. And I think there was a consensus takeaway from those rumors that nothing was confirmed until today when Kyle Shanahan said that, yes, I personally reached out to Bill Belichick to fill not just the defensive coordinator role, but to have literally any role with the Niners, obviously outside of offensive coordinator and head coach. If he wanted to simply be part of the organization. And Bill Belichick politely, mind you, declined. Now, like I was saying, there was a consensus of like, why would Bill Belichick, the greatest coach in NFL history, ever want to come to San Francisco and play second fiddle to Kyle Shanahan? If anything, it should be reversed. It should be Belichick as the head coach and Shanahan as the OC, which there are people wanting that. There are people saying Shanahan should step down and let Bill Belichick take over. And it was like, what are we doing? Like, why would that ever happen? I digress. People are crazy. Shanahan confirmed today that they indeed did want to bring in Bill Belichick, likely as the defensive coordinator. Because imagine that. If they could actually make things work outside of their egos, because they both have big ones, but they also both respect each other a lot. And don't forget, that whole Jimmy G trade to San Francisco was orchestrated by Bill Belichick calling Kyle Shanahan. Like, there's a lot of love there, although I don't think it would have worked. A lot of love for or between those two people. Hence why Kyle Shanahan, despite not getting it to work out, said, "Hey, Bill, do you want to be a part of the Niners?" Bill said, "Thank you, but I'm good." But it's interesting to see that Nick Sorensen likely wasn't the number one option. He was in-house. There's comfortability. But they also brought in Brandon Staley. They wanted Bill Belichick. There was rumors that they tried to talk to the Jets about interviewing Jeff Ulbrich and bringing him back to the Bay. Nick Sorensen, while might be deserving, while it maybe is the missing ingredient to, this amazing pie, right? He's the missing piece of the puzzle. I think we can all agree that he was not their first choice. Might not have been their second choice. Heck, maybe not even their third choice. And they brought in somebody behind him to aid him because they kind of admitted that if he exceeds, great. But really isn't a lot of trust there just yet. They like him. They want him to be a part of the team. And, I believe that, even with Steve Wilkes, this defense ranked top 5 somewhere, right? This team is too good on, actually on the field to play poorly. There's too many stars everywhere. There's too much roster. This roster is too good to be bad, right? That's why when the team was playing poorly with Wilkes, it was like, okay, something's wrong, hence why I got fired. But to me, there's a clear narrative being painted as to, or, not even a narrative. There's just a clear answer of like, yeah, they like Nick Sorensen, but not as much as Bill Belichick, Jeff Ulbrich, and to a certain degree, Brandon Staley, where I guarantee you if Nick Sorensen struggles, he gets demoted, Staley gets promoted, and that's kind of is what it is. But we'll see how things play out. Just small things that came out today that kind of give us a clearer picture as to what the NFL offseason was like and where San Francisco currently sits today. But forget about Bill Belichick. Forget about, Tom Brady. Kyle Shanahan may have been asked 2 of the most important questions Niner fans have been wanting to know. They're niche questions, mind you. We will start with, why do you not prioritize drafting offensive linemen? Now, I'm going to summarize this. I do think Kyle Shanahan made a good point of like, well, you don't get to draft the players that you want to all the time. There are plenty of players that San Francisco's wanted to drafted that just aren't there on the board anymore. And I think that happened this year. I think it happened in the first round, second round, and maybe even further down the road. I think it's happened in a handful of drafts. Now, it doesn't mean San Francisco hasn't whiffed a few times in the first round and not taking Tristan Wirfs and drafting Javon Kinlaw being one of the bigger ones. But they asked Kyle Shanahan, a lot of people want to know, why do you not draft offensive linemen? And I think the best quote of Shanahan's was, we don't have a philosophy to avoid offensive linemen. We just don't have a philosophy that says we are always going to build inside out to establish the run, which is so funny because while Kyle did a great job defending his stance of, well, if we don't take Deebo or Aiyuk or Kittle or go trade for McCaffrey, that you can have the greatest offensive line in the world. If you can't score, what is it worth, right? Shanahan did also say, and he's right, that you can draft an offensive lineman in the first round, and they could not be that great, but they play for 12, 13 years and no one cares. They're veteran journeymen that have longevity. People are like, hey, that's pretty good. When Shanahan's like, that's not the case. But my question would be, but you do build from the inside out defensively. You made it a priority to go out and trade for Trent Williams. You drafted Aaron Banks in the second round. Yet it feels, and you also drafted McGlinchey in the first round. So it's not like you haven't had the inside out motto before. It just seems like as of recently, there's been this Shanahan mindset of give me all the toys, which the toys are great. We love the toys. We love Deebo and Aiyuk and Kittle and McCaffrey and Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall and Cowling and whatnot. Isaac Grendo and Elijah Mitchell. We love all those guys, right? But you also need to have the toy chest to put the toys in. And the defense has the toy chest. The defense has Bosa and Javon Hargrave. And in previous years, it had Bosa and Hargrave and D Ford and, Arden Key, and had Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner. It had the toy chest to have a weaker secondary, to be able to aid the weaker parts of the defense. Go back to 2019. Secondary wasn't that great. It wasn't bad by any means, but it was Emmanuel Mosley, a UDFA, K'Wan Williams, which was super underrated, but an older Richard Sherman in his last great year. It was Jaquiski Tard and Jimmy Ward. And while those guys are great, those guys are good, we like all those guys, it wasn't a great secondary. The defensive line, the front seven, made it better, right? And so why is that motto existent for the defense, but not the offense? And you can argue that this year more than ever, Kyle, you have the toys already. Nobody was questioning, Deebo or, if Deebo and Aiyuk and Kittle and McCaffrey could get it done. It's if Burford makes a block, if someone picks up a blitz, if Feliciano doesn't get hurt, if you improve the right side of the offensive line, maybe the ending of last year is different. And when you walk into the draft this year, albeit I am someone that praises and likes the Pearsall pick, Niner fans on draft night were livid that it wasn't an offensive lineman, that it wasn't a cornerback, that it wasn't, not even in the first round, that it wasn't an offensive lineman in round 1 or 2. Sure, they got Dominic Pooney, which is great. People wanted Troy Fontenot. People wanted Fashanu. People wanted the Marius Mims. They wanted Roger Rosengarten. They wanted, Shu Matea. And those guys are all unknowns currently, but the talent's certainly there to succeed. And when you watch teams like the Ravens and especially Kansas City, who have beefed up the offensive line any chance they get to protect Mahomes, you already have the weapons, Kyle. I kind of lean towards the fans of like, why haven't you invested in the toy chest when you have the toys? But we'll see. Kyle Shanahan's a crazy guy. He likes his toys. But on this one, Kyle, I get what you're saying, but I just gotta disagree. Moving on to our second to last topic of the day, because Kyle Shanahan, once again, talking to Tim Kawakami, and this was more of the funnier quotes of the day, was when Tim Kawakami asked Kyle Shanahan, can Brock Purdy make changes at the offensive line? And Kyle essentially said, well, of course he can. Matt Ryan did before I got there. And then when I got there, Matt Ryan still could. I said, Matt, if you see something, change it. I always want to throw the ball deeper, but I really don't want you to have to worry about that part of the game. Just trust the offense. Just trust the scheme. If you have faith in me, it'll work itself out. You don't need to change really anything. Just trust in good old Kyle Shanahan. And when I tell you I laughed so hard because Kyle was trying to be humble and try to say, yeah, my quarterbacks have complete freedom. Then in the next statement said, but if you truly trust me, maybe you just don't change anything. If you truly buy into what I'm preaching, maybe you just run the play how I said it. Maybe you just kind of sit there and play quarterback and then let me do all the work behind the scenes. And it was like, God, Kyle, like, we already know you're a control freak, and that's great. Any team would want to hire Kyle Shanahan besides the Chiefs. Any team would. But then you get into like these weird situations where it's like, let go of the reins, Kyle. And it's not to say he's not right. It's not to say that the majority of the time the scheme's going to work. I'm sure 99% of the time, Kyle Shanahan has the right thing in mind, the right play call, the right scheme there. It's all there. But it's so funny to hear him try to paint himself as this fun, relaxed, like, yeah, I'm the cool mom. It's kind of like the uber conservative parent that is like, you have to be home by 8 o'clock and you better be at the front door in bed with the bed made and your teeth brushed. And then like a couple of years later, they relax. I'm like, yeah, the cool progressive parent, anything goes. Love is love. You want to smoke? You want to drink? Do whatever you want. And you're like, who are you? That's not who raised me. Like, what the heck? And it's funny because I'm the youngest of 4 kids. I'm sure my brothers and sisters can attest to this, that the older siblings are usually treated more stricter. It's usually your parents' first couple kids. They're in their 20s. They're like, you have to be this way, that way. Then their parents get older. And in my specific circumstance, my mother was in her 40s when she had me. My brother is in his 40s now. There's a big age gap between 27 and 40, right? 44, whatever he is now. But I can guarantee you, if they look at me, they're like, Mom treated you like a baby. She was on my butt. She used to get the wooden spoon and the belt and the switches and the thorn bushes. And if I did one thing wrong, if I spoke up once, it was game over. Game, set, match, no milk, no cookies. Christmas is over. Meanwhile, you can talk back. She gets you ice cream every single night. You do whatever you want. Kyle Shanahan tried to play the two sides of the coin there of like, yeah, I'm the tough, hard parent. But meanwhile, I'm fun. I'm outgoing. Oh, I'm so fun and loving. Oh, I love my kids. Do whatever you want. It's like, Kyle, no, man. Like, we know who you are. Just buy in. Just accept it. Stop trying to portray yourself as something you're not. Be authentic, Kyle. Be authentic. The last topic of the day, kind of wrapping things around in a big circle. We talked about Brandon Aiyuk holding out, not having leverage, and really just kind of like in the in-between of will they, won't they pay me, right? I think it's great when you get 2 examples of the exact opposite end of the spectrum. So again, Brandon Aiyuk doesn't hold out, wants to get traded, but then is there at OT or they're at training camp day 1. We'll see if he practices, probably won't, but he's there day one. In the building with his team, likely in meetings, showing the Niners that I want to be here, which good for him. It's great news for us as fans, right? In the team. But then you go to Jerry World in Dallas with the Dallas Cowboys, right? CeeDee Lamb, who also wants to get paid, the exact same draft class as Brandon Aiyuk. I think taken 13th overall, if I'm correct there. But is kind of on an equal playing field to Aiyuk in regards to asking for $30 million. I'm sure Lamb will get more. But the difference is Lamb has a ton of leverage, and he's not coming to camp. He can hold out. CeeDee Lamb knows the Dallas Cowboys need him if they want to succeed. He has all the leverage in the world to hold out. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Brandon Aiyuk knows the Niners want him. The Niners know he wants them. But Aiyuk and the Niners both know that the team's success is not fundamentally based on him. Hence why the hold-in. Aiyuk's hold-in is him basically, he's admitting defeat. His game isn't working. The leverage isn't changing. It's fun to see the exact same situations or very similar situations. Different receivers, different teams, same draft class. Both guys want to get paid. But you see two guys, one has leverage, one has no leverage. And you see how things progress. CeeDee Lamb could not show up for a week and a half. Dallas caves, boom, he gets paid. I would not be shocked by the end of this month if CeeDee Lamb gets paid. I would be shocked if Brandon Aiyuk, by the end of this month, is signing a brand new contract. Two different receivers, similar situations, but we're going to see very different outcomes. What an eventful day one of Niners training camp. They didn't even practice. It was just press conferences and a podcast. And we talked for nearly an hour. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you can, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell notification. That way you're notified when a new video comes out. If you're listening on the podcasting platforms, please leave a review. I don't care what you put on there. Give us 5 stars. Tell us what you thought about this episode of the podcast. Tell us what you're excited about most about day one or about Niners training camp as a whole. Who do you want to see? Will the Aiyuk situation figure itself out before the month of August? Tell us down below in the comments. Don't forget to follow us on social media at 49ers_access is the Twitter. At 49ers.access is the Instagram. Again, you can use our promo code 49ersaccess, 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com and save yourself $20 off your first purchase. That's all I have for you today. Training camp day number 2 headed your way quickly. Follow us on social media for all the updates and come right back here to this podcasting channel or the YouTube channel for the latest Niner news, content, opinion, and let's get ready for the 2024 San Francisco 49ers season together right here on 49ers Access. And as always, my name is Sterling Bennett, and until next time, stay faithful.